They took you from your mother's arms when evil had its way. Your only crime was being born into our darkest day. Forgotten, never be forgotten. The Torah blessed a gentleman, and he was not ashamed. Because of this they took his life. He dared to love God's name. Forgotten, never be forgotten. Forgotten, never be forgotten. The heavens shake, the angels moan when innocence is lost. Millions still remain unknown, even though they paid the cost. Forgotten, never be forgotten. Forgotten, never be forgotten. Dark clouds fill the painted sky and turn the sun to black. People heard their helpless cries and still they turned their back. Living in a dying world with pain beyond despair. Listen close and you will hear the still unanswered prayer. The tears fall down like rain. Hear them sighing that they did not die in vain. Hear them singing, they are calling in the night. Their message ringing, we must be strong and do what's right. Forgotten, never be forgotten. Forgotten, never be forgotten. Forgotten, never be forgotten.
This is a PowerPoint slide from many years ago. How many of you want to guess the last time that Sam spoke here? Well, let's take a look. It was 2014. And Sam was a young man in his mid-80s at the time. And that day, by the way, he spoke in two different congregations, one here in the morning, one in the afternoon, and was a blessing to many. So our guest speaker, Sam Silberberg, you can hear his message that he delivered at Ben David 8 years ago. You can hear it on the website. Just go to Testimonies, which is one of the main menus, and then Holocaust Survivors. And Sam is going to be the first one listed there. So I encourage you to do that. He just spoke for a little bit that morning. I think it went an hour and a half. So you'll enjoy it. And after you've heard him today and you've gone to the website, you can Google him as well. There are many things to listen to. So on the website, by the way, there's a brief bio. You'll have the audio recording of Sam. And Sam, at the time, he had just finished his second book. He wrote that in 2013. Amazingly and thankfully, Sam is still active in telling his story and the story of so many who perished at the hands of an evil regime, humans at their very worst. You know, as we went over the numbers of people who perished during the Holocaust, Sam is originally from Poland, correct? And I hope you noticed that probably 55% of the people who perished in the Holocaust were from Poland. Sam alone, you were raised in an Orthodox family, correct? And one of the things from one of the books, was 108 close family members, only 5 survived. One of them being Sam. So I mentioned there are 2 books that Sam has published. The first one here, this is From Hell to the Promised Land, a boy's daring escape from a Nazi concentration camp. This is a historic bibliographical testimony. And here's just a little excerpt for the book. Sam was only 10 years old when the Nazis marched into Poland. It describes his life under Nazi occupation, experiences of 2.5 years in 2 Nazi concentration camps with his father, his daring escape during the death march, towards the end of the war, liberation, post-war adventures involving the journey to the Promised Land, his deportation to the Cyprus camps, and then finally the War of Independence for the State of Israel. The second published book is What Made Sammy Run? My Story. And this is the one that he had published just a year before he spoke here the last time. And this one happens to be adapted for young adults. So, those of you, who are teenagers, young adults, you might find this especially interesting. I'm just going to read from a critical review here of this book. What especially appealed to me is that the book invites the reader to share Sammy's experiences from pre-World War II to pre-Israel Palestine. It is a harrowing story and appalling to realize that so many of his trials occurred before his teenage years. I have read many adult books on the Holocaust, and although this is written at a young adult level, it never feels dumbed down. Sam lived after the war. He did live in Israel for a time. He worked in New York City and retired with his wife, Anita, in Laguna Woods, California. So they are locals now. His oral history has been taken by the Shoah Foundation. That was formed by Steven Spielberg. And his story is also preserved in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Sam has been a frequent speaker to schools, museum audiences, and universities, and he continues to this very day. So we are honored to have Sam join us today to share his story once again. And let's give him a warm welcome.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach to everyone. You have heard the numbers and the percentages. So there were only 5 people left of my extended family who survived the Holocaust. I am 92 years of age, and I was 10 years old when the Nazis marched into Poland. And I was forewarned during a bon voyage party of my grandfather that went to Palestine on October of 1938, that the party took place. I heard people that were with rumors. You know, as a kid, I was always interested in what adults are saying. As a matter of fact, my parents spoke Yiddish, and they didn't want me to didn't want me to understand Polish or any other language. So finally, I had to learn Yiddish. But when the whole story came about, when I saw people rumoring what happened, Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass, happened in Germany, where the German goons attacked all Jewish institutions, burned them, and murdered some Jews. And my uncle saw me being perturbed about this, told me, look, this is a very significant event, and it bodes very dangerous things for life to come, because just about a few months before this Kristallnacht, Adolf Hitler occupied part of Sudetenland under the auspices that there are German-speaking people there, so he can occupy, and before you know it, if the world lets him do this, he will expand. Sure enough, in 1939, by the time I was 10 years old, just a few days after my 10th birthday, as a matter of fact, the Germans marched into Poland and occupied it like a knife through butter. And as soon as they occupied Poland, soon after the occupation, they started taking Jewish hostages. So they took hostages of my 2 uncles in adjacent town, just in case a German gets hurt or killed, they would execute them. Of course, they did execute my 2 uncles. They also took my father as hostage, but we managed to free him. And because my father was running, my family had extensive business in town, and the Germans confiscated all the businesses, prohibited Jewish people to run and own businesses. So they forced my father to manage the business on their behalf, but they reaped all the profits. In a small town, and we had my immediate family. I had 2 brothers and a sister, and we had a printing plant, a bus corporation, and other businesses. So my father was busy running it, and the Germans collecting the money from it. And as soon as they came in and they started issuing very restrictive rules where Jewish kids could no longer go to school, so I was held back from going to school. But since my father and family were Orthodox, we had Hebrew school, which is called Ghetto, and I was going to Hebrew school in the morning, to day school in the morning and Hebrew school in the afternoons. Very little time to play. But now, because of the restrictive covenants that the Germans issued against Jewish people and kids in their schooling, so I had to take my siblings, my younger sister and brother, to clandestine schools which were conducted in private homes, depending on the level and age of the child. However, the Germans issued frequent restrictive orders for Jews so that we could not really make a decent living, and they collected able-bodied Jewish men and took them into labor camps to supplement the labor needed, because they mobilized all their able-bodied men into the army to conquer the world, because they were singing a song. As soon as they marched into Poland, they were singing, "Today we own Germany, tomorrow the entire world." And with that kind of, if you're familiar with the word chutzpah, they entered Poland and behaved and conquered the rest of Europe. And you are now familiar with similar behavior by Vladimir Putin of Russia. So you can understand. The only difference is that the Nazis had an extensive program of exterminating the Jews. The word exterminating we use for mice and so on. But the Germans, with their highly scientific and chemical industry, have developed means by which they will exterminate Jews. As a matter of fact, their immediate behavior was by taking Jewish people that they wanted to exterminate into trucks where they were shot close, and they would take a pipe, a hose connected to the exhaust pipe, and feeding it into the truck and killing them that way. But soon enough, the German industry, chemical industry, developed a means of mass extermination by using cyclone B12. Well, as soon as they occupied the rest of Europe, they decided to set up extermination camps. Now you will see, if you read the story that you just see here all over the place, is that the Germans organized extermination camp primarily in Poland. Number one, the Polish people were quite anti-Semitic, and they tolerated him taking all the Jews and putting them in camps or in ghettos. And Poland was the center where they assembled people and exterminated them. Life in Poland was very difficult because they collected able-bodied Jewish men to be shipped into labor camps, concentration camps in Germany. In Germany itself, there were no extermination camps. Most of the extermination camps were in Poland, like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Bergen-Belsen, and so on. There were a lot of people that were killed in Auschwitz extermination camp. It came to a point where the Germans established a special railroad track which was leading, I don't know if you are familiar, you have seen the movies. They were assembling the Jewish people from all the countries of Europe that were enumerated here just before, and sent them on railroad tracks, which were closed, and they would not feed them. The method was very simple. They assembled the people from whenever they wanted them together, like whether it's Hungary, Russia, because at the beginning of the war, Hitler had a pact with Russia, which he violated soon after. And that's how come you hear about the Battle of Stalingrad. But the railroad tracks were built especially into Auschwitz, because I know about Auschwitz since our town was only 12 miles out of Auschwitz. As a matter of fact, at one point in 1941, when the railroad tracks to Auschwitz were so vast and steady that they couldn't exterminate them fast enough. So the Germans had to sidetrack some of the trains coming in to our town. And when we were still living there in 1941, my mother got word of it, so she sent me with bags of food. At the age of 11 and a half, to go and see if I can throw them at the outstretched hands of starving people in those trains. My first experience in doing it was unbelievable, because when I first got there, I could only hear the cries of people which are starving from hunger. There were no facilities, and I had to crawl along the bushes of the sidetrack train just to be able to try to reach her, because the Nazi guards, if they would have caught me, they would have taken me in with those people. So I had to crawl among the bushes and throw some food at them. My my aim, I wasn't able to really reach very well, but I got a satisfaction of being able to do it. And when I came back, my mother asked me how it went, so I told her that it went well and all this. I couldn't tell her that if the Nazis would have caught me, because if I would tell her that the Nazis would have caught me, taken me in, that she wouldn't allow me to go there again. And I wanted to be able to do it. But things got so bad that they took my older brother into a labor camp in Germany. So we were only left with my younger brother and my sister. And before you know it, the Germans decided to cleanse our town. It's called Warsaw. They called it in German Judenrein, which means to cleanse the town of Jews. And for two reasons. Number one, they didn't want any Jewish population to live among the non-Jews, because it wouldn't be easy to collect them. So they decided to take all the Jews of the surrounding towns and send them into a ghetto to collect. So they decided, since they decided Warsaw, our town, to be Judenrein or cleansed of Jews, to be precise, they sent us to a ghetto in Schrodula. The Germans were shrewd enough, smart enough to set up a Judenrein, which means the internal management of the ghetto was managed by Jews, which were subservient to the Germans and executed all their laws. And then some. The ghetto was surrounded with a barbed wire. And frequently, whenever the Germans needed to fulfill a labor quota for Germany, in German industry, they would come and raid. And that's, again, I'm abbreviating a lot of the story. However, I wrote a book, and it's going to be available to you, called From Hell to the Promised Land. And you'll be able to get it. It's only $15, and you will have an extensive description of exactly what happened. The Germans, as we were in that concentrated ghetto, there were 35,000 Jews in that particular ghetto. And frequently, the Germans will conduct raids again to collect able-bodied men as a labor force to Germany, and the weak and old, elderly and babies, they would send to the extermination camp. This happened throughout Europe. Well, when we were in that ghetto, we were lucky to be in a basement apartment which overlooked the hill, and you could see the connection of you could see the streetcar station about half a mile away, which Jews were prohibited from using but the economic situation in Ghetto was so bad, we could not afford. We could not get food. Everything was rationed. And the fact that my father couldn't make a living from the business and everything, so he decided for me, because my older brother was already in a labor camp in Germany, in a concentration camp actually. He decided that if I could go, he taught me how to do it, to go from the ghetto to the population outside the ghetto and do trading, because the Jewish community in the ghetto had various craftsmen, shoemakers, tailors, and so on, that were able to manufacture goods, even so they were scarce because of the war. And the outside, the ghetto, the Polish agrarian community had food which was needed in the ghetto. So because we were situated on a ground floor near the grounds, they created an opening where I could sneak out from the ghetto and do a trade. And my father taught me how to trade. I had no idea. I was only about 12 years old by then. So I would take shoes or clothing and mark it up. Like shoes, I would sell, they were $10. I sold them for $15 outside, or suits and so on. I had no idea how to do it, but I learned. And then with that money that I sold the goods that were manufactured in the ghetto, I purchased groceries which were not available inside the ghetto and bought them in the ghetto. As a matter of fact, I had to get certain materials, building materials, so that my father can build a hiding place, which we did, so that when the Nazis conduct raids, that we were hidden inside. We were hidden inside that location. He parted, he built a wall against which he put an oven with a baking compartment, and the baking compartment was used as an entry to the hiding place whenever the Germans raided to take people, because he didn't want us to be caught. Well, at one point in the beginning of 1943, we were going into the hideout whenever there was a raid. As a matter of fact, during that time, since this is the end of Passover, I want you to know that that's the period of time when the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto took place. As I mentioned, my father was very Orthodox, and I was very proud of the fact that finally the Jews in Warsaw Ghetto had an uprising, because I was used to them going to the assembly line. The Germans created assembly lines where they forced the Jews to assemble, and they segregated the sound and healthy people to go to German concentration camps, and the others to the extermination camp. So I was proud to see that finally the Jews are able to not just say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, but rebel against the Germans, and they were able to maintain the fight for almost the whole month. And you probably heard about it. But things got worse again. I told you they raided the ghetto. At one point, right after my bar mitzvah, which when I was 13 years old, we realized that the German convoy surrounded the ghetto, and everybody went into the hiding place. We went into the hiding place, and as a matter of fact, there were other people that also went. The hiding place was built for 14 people, and there were about close to 20 people there when this particular raid took place. And we heard all of a sudden, when we were in the hiding place, we heard, because we were in the bottom basement floor, we heard the German trucks going by with the loudspeakers asking everybody to assemble in a public place so that they could to facilitate the segregating the able-bodied men from the weak and meek people. And everybody was very quiet in the hiding place until all of a sudden we heard in the apartment above us, because when the Germans walked in with their boots, with their steps and their stomping, we heard them, and we were shivering. And all of a sudden, one of the babies, there was a mother with a baby there, started crying. And that revealed our hiding place. The mother tried to subdue the baby with a pillow. Unfortunately, she suffocated the baby. She was crying later, but the Germans discovered us and decided to assemble us. They assembled us. They asked us to go to the assembly place. When we got out of the hiding place to go to the assembly place, I saw the people walking. It was a cloudy day. They're walking with all their meager belongings, hoping that they walk and they go into a place where they can survive and live. Little did they know that they're walking to their death. It was a very sad, unfortunate sight. And as we were going, at that time, my sister was in the hospital with gangrene in her leg. So there was only me and my younger brother. And my father and mother decided that my younger brother goes with my mother and I go with him. But as we came to the assembly place, they segregated the babies and indigent from the healthy people, and the healthy people were selected to go into labor camp. And I decided I don't want to be a burden on my father in case they make the selection. So I want him to be able to go to the section of able-bodied men, and he had a better chance of survival. But then we were aware of what was going on in Auschwitz, because we were so close to it. Well, then we came to the assembly place. You just imagine 35,000 people assembled in an enormous lot which was used for marketplace. And the Germans roping off in sections where they made selections for this, that, and the other. They were barbaric in taking the babies off the mother's breast and just dumping them on the ground. It was an awful sight to see. But I didn't want to prevent my father from going to camp, so I decided to let him go, and I decided to look what's going on. Fortunately, I use the word fortunately in quotes. I was aware enough when the German guard separated the people. They came upon a couple with kids. He separated the husband from the wife and kids. And while he did so, there was a big commotion going on, and his back was turned to me. I went and I snuck into the section where my father was, which was the able-bodied man. And then there was a problem, and I reached the section of the able-bodied man when my father was 13 years old. And I was afraid because there was a secondary selection. So what do I do? Because when they see me, I'm that small, they're going to send me to the extermination camp. Fortunately, there was a construction site nearby. So I was able to find the cinder block, and I took it to the back row, stood on the back row, and when the Nazi came and pointed, "What do you do for a living?" to my father, he said he's a construction person, he's a builder. So he sent him to the able-bodied section. He made further selections. He comes to me, he says to me, "What are you doing?" So I told him I'm a builder's helper. So he told me to go to my father's section, but I didn't dare step down from the cinder block because he sees me. But when he went further away, I snuck in to my father's section, and we were taken. Before you know, right after that, we were loaded onto trucks. So when I came onto the truck with my father, we were loaded on trucks, and I looked at it, and I wanted to see if I could see my mother and my younger brother. And this tumult, and this crying, shouting situation, I couldn't see here. And we were taken to a camp called Annaberg. That was deep in the forest, and they took us to that camp to build barracks for future inmates, etc. After 4 months, they took us to a camp which is called Blechhammer. It's a sub-camp of Auschwitz. And they tattooed us tattoo das with a number. My number on my arm is 178509. My father's number was 178508. As a matter of fact, my hiking partner, an artist, just this Passover, Easter holiday, gave me a gift of a collage of a glass, stained glass picture painting of which the number is with a chai and all this. Her name is Alexandra Quijano, and she's a great artist. And she has done it, and I'm very appreciative of it, because we discussed whether my number should be taken off, and I said, you can't take it off from the heart. Even if you erase it here, it still stays here. So I was very pleased to have it. We were taken, in Araberg, we built, when I saw I was a very obnoxious kid, and I couldn't take it. I wanted to escape. And my father warned me, look, you see this barbed wire here? This barbed wire is electrified. You cannot escape. Because once you touch it, you get electrified and killed. But I was restless. So when they took us to Blechama, and I got this number, they took us out. We weren't confined to a small area. We were taken into an industrial complex where we were. That industrial complex was huge. There were prisoners of war from England, France, Russia, and also civilian people from all over Europe, which the Germans managed to enslave to maintain their industry. There we were mixed, and I was able to acquire, because once we were in that camp, they issued us striped uniforms. Now, me being 13 and a half years old by that time, everything was too big. I had to fold it. As a matter of fact, a capo, who was a supervisor that the Germans installed in concentration camp, I guess I must need it, eh? Thank you. L'chaim. A capo, but I don't need it anymore. A capo, which is a Jewish supervisor, which was chosen by the Germans to do their bidding, saw me and said, how the heck did you get to this place? So I told him I walk. So he told me, yeah, you're a wise guy, aren't you? Anyhow, in that concentration camp, we worked, and I was assigned to a German electric welder to be a helper. That electric helper had a limp. He was injured. His name was Frank. Herr Frank, Mr. Frank, I called him, and he was very good to me. And we were not allowed to contact any of the other prisoners of war. However, because Mr. Frank was good to me, I was able to contact French or British prisoners of war, and it so happens that the British prisoners of war had a clandestine radio, and they knew what is going on in the war, so they could brief us on the things going on and the progress of the Allied forces and so on. Things were very bad in concentration camp. We were assigned to barrack number 15, and the routine was very simple. In the back of the barrack was a crematorium, which was used to get rid of the corpses of the people that could not perform any labor for the Germans anymore. They were meek and sick, so they were used. So you could smell the odor ever so often of burning flesh. You think I need it? It was horrible. And I desperately wanted to escape. And my father warned me, you cannot escape this. But by that time, the Allied forces were conducting raids, bombing raids on the German industry. And the only way you could escape from concentration camp is if the Allied planes dropped bombs and it's presumed that you were killed in the rubble, etc. So at one point, I was able to escape because there was an alarm and everything. Damn it, the planes flew by without dropping any cookies. And I had to come back because the rule was if you went out of the concentration, if you escape, they would take and kill 10 prisoners. And I'm sure my father would have been included. Well, I was very, very annoyed and restless. I hated being in prison. And you'll see, I have the book that I've written, From Hell to the Promised Land. You'll see the barbed wire. This is the authentic guard tower in the camp, and where it says in German, Lebensgefahr, and so on, which means it's life-threatening barbed wire, and so on. Things were awful in the camp. And we were fortunate that I had a good German. I will tell you something more about it later. A good boss, and I was able to intermingle during the lunch break because we got a half-hour lunch break. He had an hour plus. So during that period, even so we were forbidden. I had contact with the French and German prisoners of war, and English prisoners of war, etc. So I could speak to them and find out what's going on. But when I came back, when you come back to the camp, and we were shackled, we were marched a few kilometers, shackled, 5 in a row. Things were so bad in concentration camp, I felt I'm going to die because we were starving. Luckily, they gave us wood pulps as for smoking ration. But since neither me or my father smoked, we were able to trade it in for sugar rations with other prisoners that did smoke, etc. But things were bad. And I said to my father was an Orthodox Jew. He tried to maintain the laws of kashrus in camp and so on. And we had discussions. I was very, very disappointed in life and very down. And I said to my father, look, what am I going to do? I work for the Germans, and then I'm going to drop dead. They're going to kill me anyhow. So what's the point of doing it? I might just as well commit suicide, especially after I failed the escape, because the Allied forces didn't bomb. And I talked to him, and he said to me, look, you gotta be hopeful. You gotta have faith in life. God is going to help you somehow. And he constantly spoke of God and all this. And I said to him, look, I don't know how you can tell me that God is going to help me when the Germans have on their insignia. I had someplace, I had a belt here. I don't see it. I had a belt, the Nazi authentic German Wehrmacht belt, which has the SS insignia on it, and the inscription, Gott ist mit uns, which means God is with us. So I said to my father, how can God witness all this? And they claim God is with us. You pray to God. What happens? We had this discussion. He says, look, there's no point of living. If I'm going to die, why should they have the pleasure, the fruits of my labor, and then I collapse? So he told me, look, I know you are hesitant to believe that God is almighty in all this, but you gotta have hope. You gotta be a little more hopeful in life. Hang on to something. So he told me, look, by the way, this is an authentic German belt from the German Wehrmacht. And you see it has you can pass it on. You can pass it on. So anyhow, my father says to me, look, I know you find that it's unjust that God allows that, but you gotta have hope. You gotta have hope in something. God is gonna help you. But he said, I'll tell you a story. Since you don't believe, you think God is not doing the right thing, you still need to have hope, something that you get out of here. So he told me the story about 2 flies that fell into cream. He says, one of them believed, no, you don't believe. So one of them was an optimist, the other one was a pessimist. Both flies fell into cream. The pessimist had no faith in God. He didn't believe in himself. He had no intention of living. He just dropped and drowned. The optimist, however, believed in himself and his ability to get out. He says, there's got to be something. God is going to help me to get out of here. He started flapping the wings back and forth and kicking until he made butter out of the cream and got out. So let that be a guide to you. It's always better to be an optimist than a pessimist. Lo and behold, a few months later, during the snow of winter, we were marched shackled. I see a woman on the side. And as we got closer, I recognized the coat. This is my mother, and I kind of nudged the guy next to me because we were shackled. This is my mother. He said to me, shut up, kid, because if you're loud enough, they're going to take her in. They did. Fortunately, I was quiet, and she managed to slip in a piece of paper with a contact information to my father's contingent. And when my father and I discussed it, we were wondering how we get in contact with her. We tried different methods. Lo and behold, my German boss, I said to my father, look, my German boss, who was disappointed from the wound and everything he got on the Russian front, maybe I will ask him, because he had a motorcycle. So my father said, yeah, but when you ask him, just tell him, don't disclose that you have your mother there. Tell him that you have an aunt and so on. So I told my boss, I have an aunt that is in the monastery, if he would be willing. Well, he was willing to contact her. He went there and brought back food supplies and stuff like this. As a matter of fact, at one point, I was caught with a loaf of bread on me. And I got punished with 25 lashes on my rear end. And anyhow, that boss went to my mother and got us all this. This, by the way, reminds me, because I was very bitter about the whole German. I used to say, a good German, a good death, a bad German, a bad death, but death to them all, because I was so disappointed. And it took me a long time, only a few, 2 years ago, I decided they ought to be thankful for what he did and see if I can get in touch with the family. And I contacted the German embassy. Unfortunately, they have no help. In any case, I wanted them to know that their father was good. It reminds me the story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, where God was looking for a righteous man. Anyhow, I'm abbreviating everything. come January of 1945, we were already hearing artillery of the Russians, because we were in Oberschlesien, which is near Poland. It was Germany, but near Poland. The Russians were advancing. We could hear the Russian artillery on the Oder River and all this. And we were hopeful that we would survive. And we were then on January 21 of 1945, the German announced that all of the inmates of the Blechemer concentration camp, which were about 4,800, must assemble to go to walk further into Germany so we can render services and build defensive trenches for them. Well, lo and behold, they did not give us any food at all. And that march was in the annals of concentration camp history known as the Death March. Just to give you a number, of the 4,800 prisoners that were taken onto the Death March, only 800 made it to Bergen, to the destination. The rest perished. Things were so bad. They didn't feed us anything. We only lived on snow we melted in our metal containers. And I spoke to my father. I wanted us to hide in the attic of the barracks. But my father said, look, the barrack is near concentration camp. They're going to blow it up, so what's the point of doing it? That's not a way to die. There will be, God's help, there will be some way of doing it. They kept us marching, and overnight into German barns. Things were going better, worse. As a matter of fact, that was a Sunday, the 21st of January, 1945. Then day after day, they marched us finally on Wednesday. I saw a sign, we saw a sign sermon saying Neisse Neustadt, which is the town where my mother was, in a monastery, in a Catholic monastery, working for them. So I said to my father, see this sign, now we can hide ourselves in the hay of the barn, and we go there. He said, fine, we'll do it. Well, one night after the other, it didn't happen because the Germans woke us up with the anesthesia in the morning, early, 5 o'clock, it was still dark. Things were going, and people were dying left and right. It was so bad that it was too heavy for me to carry a blanket. So in the morning, I dropped the blanket, knowing that I would be able to get a blanket for the night from a corpse on the side of the road. That's how bad things were. It was awful. As a matter of fact, at one point, a German peasant dropped a bucket of small rooted potatoes that he cooked for the pigs. And the prisoners, everybody bounced on it. My father was a very delicate man, and he wouldn't demean himself. But I caught a small potato, which was just like that. And I feel guilty about thinking and hesitating whether I should share it with my father. And I am proud of the fact that I was able to share it with my father. I don't know if you can possibly understand this. Here I was 15 years old by then, and feel guilty about not sharing a potato with my father. Nevertheless, guilt has a funny way of creeping into people's consciousness. The rabbi, I'm sure, can elaborate on it a lot more than I can. It was awful. We kept marching. Finally, on Friday, the 26th of January, the Germans lead us out from the village in the abandoned barns to the main road. And as they lead us out towards the main road, my father, who's a religious Orthodox Jew, maintains the tradition of saying the morning prayer, the Kaddish, for his father's death, because that was the anniversary of his father's death. And after we gathered the snow, and the Germans take us out of the village to the main road, they stop us at the intersection to the main road. And I want you to picture in your mind, this is a lot less than 4,000 prisoners at that point, standing on the curve, before the curve of the main road. On the main road, Germans ran away from the Russian occupation, actually, towards the American side. The skies are cloudy. You hear artillery. You see German convoys, military convoys on the road. And a whole lot of Germans running away from the Russians. And my father assembles a minion, which is 10. You gotta have 10 men to say the Kaddish. And he says the Kaddish. And as he says the Kaddish, I see the SS guard turning around to his belongings. So I quickly rip off my striped prisoner uniform, because underneath it I had a French prisoner of war sweater, which I had and stuff, so I'm not looking like a prisoner. And all I managed to do just poke my father and saying, there I'm going. And there were a bunch of German kids watching this spectacle. And I remember telling them, yeah, those lousy Jew bastards and so on, in German. die verfluchte Juden, das war schrecklich. So as it and walked by. So I walked and joined all these German civilians and peasants escaping the war, which were going on the direction of Nice, where I knew my mother was. So the German woman that I was going with tells me about the whole German propaganda line, that the Jews financing the war, etc., are going, and all this. Luckily, the Russians took a plane, attacked German convoys, and we dispersed, and I lost the woman. Everything was fine. Then I joined back after the planes stopped shooting at German convoys. We went on the road. I forgot to tell you that we were starving, and I smelled something really food. And when I smelled the food, I saw a German with a French chef with a sled, horse-driven sled, with a kettle. And that's what the smell was. So I went and jumped in the back of the kettle and poked the French prisoner of war who was the chef, and I told him in French, "Je suis s'il vous plaît, Pedro." He says, I told him, "I'm Jewish, would you please give me a piece of bread?" And he gave me a piece of bread with melted cheese on it and a bowl of onion soup, French onion soup. That's why I still like French onion soup. And it was a taste of heaven. It was unbelievable. I said, the only wish I had, I could share it with my father. Well, I finally went. I didn't know Nice was a river or anything, so the Germans were building fortifications, and I come towards the bridge over the river, and there was this German guard asking for identification. I don't know how, I didn't have any. So what am I going to do? It was a dilemma. And mind you, I'm only 15 years old in Germany, first time free. So I come to this bridge, and he says, "Ausweis bitte," which means, give me the legitimation, give me papers, please. Luckily, I had my mind with me. I told him, "Look, I don't have any papers. I was working for a German peasant, and we were running away from the Russian onslaught, and we dispersed in the field. My boss has had all my papers. I don't have any papers. Would you please let me go? I'm looking for work by here." Kept arguing back and forth. Finally said, "Get the hell out of here." That I understood. So I went. So I was afraid to ask adults for directions to the monastery. So I asked about that 12 or so year old kid. He told me that open wat de Kirche Reich, which means go down there by the church to the right. I go there. Now, mind you, I'm a child of an Orthodox family, Jewish Orthodox family. I'm coming to the door. I'm afraid. I clean my boots, shoes, and all. And I opened the door slightly just to see what's all about. And I see this beautiful banister. To the left of me was this huge cross of Christ and so on. And I was not knowing what to do. I was shivering. So I went behind the cross, standing there waiting. And then I see this woman walking down the stairs with a beautiful banister in a white uniform. I didn't know who she was. I wait. Luckily, the nuns were at prayer. I wait, the woman comes back out. I say, I lost patience. I didn't want to expose her. So I said to her, excuse me, please, do you know a certain woman by the name of Barbara Siegmund? That was her Aryan name. She looks up at me and says, ich bin das, wer sind Sie denn eigentlich? She says, I am the one. Who are you, actually? So I said to her, the first time she heard in 2 years, Mama, du kennst mich nicht in Yiddish. So she told me, and I was gone, she happened to have on a tray of cookies and tea that she was bringing to people that were taking the old people that were in that nursing home. And that she told me, get out and I'll take care of you. And then I was hidden by an aunt of mine who was in an agrarian monastery for 2 months until the Russians liberated it. To make a long story short, we went back to Poland in the hope we would find the rest of the family. We're unable. We hoped our father comes back and all this. Unfortunately, we were the only ones left alive. And my aunt, who was in the agrarian monastery, engaged in, after the war, they were trading and with American cigarettes in Poland and all this. So I met a friend who was in an orphanage in Hungary, which was also supported by the Zionist organization of orphans. They were going to go to Palestine. I met him, and he told me he's going back to Hungary and they're going to go to Palestine. And since I was tired of being persecuted for being a Jew, so I was going to go. I was excited about it, so I told my mom about it. And she basically agreed to it because I arranged for me to leave the following week, meet him and go to Budapest. Long story short, my mother escorted me to the railroad station in Krakow to meet my friend Lola Kalpen. And as the train is there, my mom says to me, she cries, look, you're the only one left, don't leave me and all that. And I was very determined, I was tired of being persecuted, to go and join the Zionists in Palestine, which was then a British mandate. So she said to me, she escorted me, and just as the train arrived, just as we were going to go up, don't leave me, she cried. It was a very, very pitiful separation. But she held on to me, and the train was just about to leave. So I said to her, look, Mom, maybe you could afford to lose a husband and 3 kids. I don't want it to happen to me. There's something I got to do about it. Well, I went up on the train. We went from Hungary to other countries. Later on, It's a whole long story. We went from one place to another. Finally, we wound up in West Germany. We had a Zionist organization. And I went with the Zionist organization. We were going to Marseille, and we were hidden in Marseille in a nut house to hide us from the British so that they don't detect us boarding a boat going to Palestine. We were intercepted. We were taken on a boat to Palestine, and we were intercepted in the port of Haifa and taken to Cyprus. I was in Cyprus for 7 months. In Cyprus, we were trained, and I was sworn in to the Haganah, which is the Israeli Defense Forces. And I had broken a leg in the training by the Haganah, and Her Majesty, the Queen of England, allowed 500 orphans to go to Palestine. I went to Palestine on my 18th birthday. And from there, I participated in the War of Liberation of the State of Israel in 1948. That was in August of 1947. And then in November, as you know, was the declaration of the independence by the UN, which the Arabs didn't accept. We were trained. We were in kibbutz. I was in a kibbutz, 2 weeks studying, 2 weeks training and work. And those are the two things I'm proudest of in my life. Number one, the potato, you don't begin to know the vastness of that. But the sharing of the potato with my father, then I had the honor and privilege, after 2,000 years of exile, to fight for the War of Liberation, establishment of the State of Israel. Okay, now I am here. Of course, I made up with my mother, came to the United States. I was sorry about how harsh I was in the departure at Krakow. I came to the United States because my mother went from Europe to America. I came to the United States to join my mother on a visitor's visa. I was admitted to Rochester Tech. And now here I am, I'm married to my wife. I got my daughter here, and I got this children, and everything is fine. Thank you very much.
Sam, that was an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, many thoughts have run through my mind over the years regarding the Holocaust, and a lot of people I have heard say how they had lost faith that there even was a God because of the experiences that they went through and the deaths and all the problems that they encountered along the way. And I offer this one thought. That has occurred to me over the years, that people say, how could a loving God allow so much suffering? And it is indeed an amazing question, and also it makes you angry in a way to think about that. Can God really, a loving God, can he allow this kind of suffering to go on? And it occurred to me that if you really stop and think about it, if it wasn't for God's intervention, we would all be speaking German now. God was there. It reminds me of one of our first Holocaust speakers who said, Mickey Montag said, but he was a little slow. God has his own timing. And I look back on the history of the whole thing, of the war, and how it went. And it was because Hitler began making his own decisions regarding the war itself and directing things. It could have been much worse. Had he not turned towards Russia, the Germans might have been able to take over England, and it would have been a very different war, very different result. Anyway, God was there, and he still is, and we thank him for that. And thank you, Sam, once more for sharing what your experience is. We're going to close with a singing of the Hatikvah, the Hope, which is the national anthem of the State of Israel. So,
please all rise. So